I recently watched this video by Doug Marks explaining how there's only one pentatonic pattern that you need to know on the guitar. There's not five of them. You don't need to know all of those. And I think he's right. But looking at some of the comments, it's pretty clear that the way he explained it, it didn't come across to a lot of people. And that compelled me to make this video. Now, I'm not a YouTuber. I have a camera that's dangling off of a piece of tape. So bear with me. All I am is a guitar player who's trying to figure this out like everyone else. So early on in guitar, we are taught this minor pentatonic shape, this box that all the musicians kind of fall into, and this is our home, this is our comfort zone. And right now we're showing this in the key of G minor because our root is rooted on the 3rd fret right here on the low E string. And we're quite familiar with this box. The pattern is simple. It's all the frets on the 3rd here, on the 3rd fret. And it's all of the notes in this kind of K pattern. If we ignore the high E string on our guitar, because it's completely redundant with the low E string, we only have 5 distinct strings, we realize that this pattern is a perfect K, starting with the root note of G and all the way up to this B string, the perfect K. So it's a nice pattern to memorize. Now, we're all aware that these notes kind of repeat themselves as the fretboard progresses towards the right, but that's hard to memorize. It's difficult for us guitar players to go explore in there because we kind of lose focus of what our home is. So what Doug, I think, is trying to teach us is that if we were to have an 11, 12, 15 string guitar, we would quickly realize that this pattern kind of just repeats itself as the guitar strings kind of go along. So after this high end E string, we'd have another A, another D, another G, another B string, and this pattern just keeps repeating itself. Now, why do the strings keep repeating themselves that way? And I'll explain that in a few minutes. So at the base, when we start looking at the minor pentatonic shape, we are taught that we start at a root note, which in this case is a G. There's a few notes here, and then we ultimately fall onto another root note, which is also a G. And then there's a few more notes, and then there's another root note all the way up here on my high E string. Now, the number of notes is exactly 5 because it's the pentatonic scale. So the root note, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we start over with the root note, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And there's another root note. And since the guitar kind of just goes on forever, 1, 2, we'd wrap around here, 3, 4, 5, and then it just starts all over again. Now, if we ignore the silliness that is the B string tuning, and I'll get to the B string tuning, and I think that's what makes this thing really complicated, and we'll decipher that in a bit. If we forget for a minute this K-shaped pattern, and we instead focus on the root, to the right of the root, 3 frets over, we have a note, and there's a note under it, and there's a note 2 frets on its right, and another note under it, and then there's another root. So if we go with that basic assumption, then when we start at this new root here, it's safe to assume that 3 frets off to the right, there's that same note. And on top of the root is a note, and 2 frets over, there's that K pattern that's starting to repeat. Now, things fall apart with our B string, but we'll ignore that for now. So this note, there's 2 across, and then there's a root here. So what we need to do as guitar players is stop focusing on this K shape in one single position and start making the familiarity. Our good old home is going to be all of these root notes. And this is really going to help us learn the fretboard, because if you do this often enough in the key of G minor, you're going to get to know where all of those G notes are, because this root is a G, this root is a G, and this root is a G as well. And right next to that G, 3 frets over, is that same note on different on different octaves. Now, we need to talk about that B string. Our guitars are tuned in what is called perfect fourths, for the most part. So in this case, it's all relative from one string to the other. The A note is the perfect fourth of the E scale. Now, this is beyond the concept of this video, but essentially the major scale has 7 notes. So the A note in the E scale, it's the 4th one. In the A scale, the D note is the 4th one. In the D scale, the G note is the 4th one. Now, likewise, we can repeat that pattern with any given note. So if my root note is a G, the note that's right above it is its perfect fourth. And in the case of a G, its perfect fourth is a C. In the case of the C scale, its perfect fourth is an F. Now bear with me, we'll get back to the pentatonic in just a few seconds, but we do need to understand the relationship between these strings, because our pentatonic scale is spanning across all of these strings. And since one of them is different, we need to take that into account. Now, since the 12th fret on our guitar is the octave, the same E, A, D, G, B, E pattern repeats itself. So the E string at the 12th fret is an E note. Its perfect fourth is an A, just like at the 0 position, the open position. And in the scale of A, its fourth is a D. And in the case of D, its fourth is a G. But things start getting really weird with our B string, because the perfect fourth of a G is a C note. But the B string at the 12th fret is not a C note, it's a B. And that's where it gets really confusing. Now, the perfect fourth of the C is an F note, so that one there is correct, but this C note is not correct. So what happens in this case is that we've got to shift things up. So when we get to a certain position on the neck, when we traverse the G string, when we're going up, or I guess down on the neck, if we're looking at it as a guitar player's perspective, this is towards the bottom of the guitar and the other direction is towards the top. When we are on the G string and we are traversing it to go onto the B string, because that B is a half a step lower in terms of tuning, the perfect fourth for this G note is going to be 1 fret to the right. That's what my C note is, specifically on the G to B transition. Now, the tuning from the B to the E string matches the perfect fourth, so the F is right on top. Now, likewise, if we decide to go in the other direction, let's say I put an F here on the 6th fret of the 2nd string, and I'm going the other direction. I'm going down on the neck. Is this where the C note is? Because we saw here on the 12th fret or the 13th fret, the F and the C are indented a bit. So if this is your F, where is your C? So if we shift up by moving down the neck, we have got to shift this guy down 1 fret. Therefore, we wind up with something like this. So what we need to learn is that given a root note on a string, its perfect fourth is just above it. Given a root note, its perfect fourth is also just above it. And given a root note, its perfect fourth is just above it. And when we get to the G string, its perfect fourth is above it, 1 fret to the right. Now, given a root note on the B string, its perfect fourth is just above it. Now, how does all of this perfect fourth stuff relate to our pentatonic, to the one pentatonic shape that we need to learn? Is that if we ignore all of these notes down here and we focus on the root that is starting on the D string, now our K pattern is still there, except because this B string is shifted over by 1 fret, these notes would normally be right there. And now you can clearly see where this K pattern is exactly the same. But because that B string is tuned as a major third and not a fourth, those notes need to be shifted up that way. Now I've taken the liberty of adding the actual labels of these notes. So in the major scale there are 7 notes. The pentatonic scale is only 5 of those. From the root note, this is the minor third. This is the 4th note of the scale. This is the 5th note of the scale. This is the minor 7th. And we're back onto the root. And as you can see, 3 frets to the right of the root is that same minor third. It's an octave higher, but it's the same note. Just above the root note, we have our perfect fourth, which is the same repetition of this K pattern. 2 frets over is that perfect fifth. Now normally this minor 7 would be above the 4th, but because we are traversing from the G to the B, this minor 7th, which would normally be right here, has to be shifted over by 1 note, and that's why it's there. And 2 frets over, we have the root note. So as a guitar player, rather than focusing on home being this box, this K-shaped box that we can't escape out of, what we want to do now is start focusing on these root notes and what's around them. So on top of a root is a perfect fourth. 2 frets over on the next string is a perfect fifth. The minor 7th in relation to a root note is 2 less. There's a perfect fifth below the root note. Diagonally we have the minor third, but that gets far away from our root note. But the minor third is 3 across from the root note, just three frets down. And if we repeat that pattern, what we should do now, pause this video if you need to, grab yourself a G minor backing track, start playing these notes, but every time you're on a root note, just stop there and make it your new home and figure out what the pattern is after that. So after this root note here, 3 frets across is a minor third. On the next string above it is the 4th, and there's the 5th. Now don't bother with this B string quite yet. That's where a lot of people get lost. But if you start here, you're on a second G note, and there's the beginning of that K pattern that you can make it a new home. Now likewise, if we took this a bit further, there's a new K pattern. If you keep on going with the K pattern, there's another one here on this root. So grab your G minor backing track, start playing your K pattern from the good old 3rd fret on the 6th string, but start exploring outwards. And every time you encounter a root note, make that your new home and see how you can do that K pattern while all the time realizing where you are in terms of which notes these are. So ultimately, learning the relative position of the minor third with the root, learning the relative position of the perfect fourth on top of the root, the perfect fifth is on the bottom of a root, and the minor 7th is 2 frets down from the root, can be really, really handy in case you get lost later on. Because inevitably that happens. As guitar players, we start at our good old home bass on the 3rd fret of the minor pentatonic. We start learning these patterns going down the neck, so towards the ground, and we reach a point where we've navigated and we're playing into this little K-shaped box that's over here, but now we're lost. Everything that's come before that is now some big haze. We've got a root note here. That's all fine and dandy, but how do I get out of it? Now I've got these 4 notes that I can play with here, but we're going to run out of steam at some point. Now obviously you can't learn this by trying to solo on top of something at breakneck speed. So grab yourself a 20-minute backing track in the key of G minor. Start doing these notes and you will get stuck here. You'll have a root note there, and what do I do now? And the exercise that we need to train ourselves in the same way that we learn that K-shaped box is to reverse back to home, not by learning these complex patterns, but by understanding what's around that root note and kind of just backtracking from there. What I mean by that is, and you can even do this, I mean, take a snapshot of this video, print out a chart if you need to. We want to get back to somewhere around here on the fretboard, which is our home, but we're stuck all the way up here because we started off here, we played all the way up, and that was great, it sounded great, we were the heroes of this world, but now we're stuck here. How do we get back? Now, we operated on some assumptions. So, for instance, we know that below the root note is a perfect fifth. However, because we've traversed the B string over to the G, there's that tuning thing. And we learn that if we're going up on the neck, we have to move it over. So that becomes the fifth. Now, if it wasn't for this string stuff, our fifth would be over here. But it's not, it's here. Now, what comes 2 frets before the fifth? That would be our perfect fourth. So now take your G minor backing track, lock yourself into this home, and practice getting out of it by going from this root and jumping on to this little lily pad that is our perfect fifth. And from there you can slide down to this fourth note. Because from our pattern, we've learned that on top, or I guess on top of the fourth, below the fourth, is another root note. And now we are well on our way to filling in a lot of the blanks. And again, you have to do this with a backing track. Take your time, look at your fretboard, understand what you're doing. Now, we learned also that there's a minor third 3 frets to the right. Of the root note. So try doing that one on your guitar. Now you should be able to go from this root note onto the minor third, the fourth, the fifth, and now you're locked into this box. And we're on our way back home. Now we do know that below the root note is a perfect fifth. That's what the pattern is. Now, in the case of the B to the G string, we had to move that fifth over by 1 fret. But in the case of D to A, we don't have to. It's perfectly aligned from there. From there, we remember that our perfect fourth is just 2 frets over from the fifth. And what is below a perfect fourth? That's our home. So grab your backing track, take your familiar K-shaped pattern, work your way up to a little home box here that causes you to lose yourself, and then practice working your way back by finding the locations of the fifths, the fourths, and the root notes. Don't worry about the minor thirds yet. Don't worry about the minor sevenths. Don't worry about those other notes. Just find your way back. Because once you find your way back, now you're going to remember, because that pattern is really familiar, you're going to remember that there's a note over here, which is your minor third. And all that's going to be familiar. You're going to remember that there's a note here on top of that fourth as you go along the scale. Now maybe you're going to remember that that's your minor seventh. And you will fill in the blanks if you do this often enough. It will require some practice. Actually, it'll require a lot of practice. But the things that this is going to teach you as a guitar player Actually, it's a lot of things. It's going to teach you which notes you're actually playing in the scale, as opposed to just following some pattern with a blindfold on. That sounds good, but you're not really aware of which note you're on in the scale. It's going to help you locate your roots throughout the fretboard. But if you practice going from left to right, top to bottom on the fretboard, and you practice going from right to left, bottom to top, that is going to help you fill in the blanks around the rest of the fretboard. And eventually, you'll be able to fill in enough of the blanks that you are going to memorize the shape, all of the shapes of the pentatonic scale across all of the fretboard, but you're going to do so not by positioning yourself in these little boxes, but you're actually going to understand which notes you're actually playing in the scale. And we know that if we're locked into this root note here, which is a G note, there's a minor seventh right there next to it. And 3 frets over, there's a minor third. And on top of it, there's a fifth. The other thing that this technique will also show you is that you can extract some interesting chord information from these patterns. So once you figure it out in your pentatonic scale that you have a root note here, and because of the funky tuning of the B string, that's your minor third and that's your fifth, these 3 notes form a G minor chord. And you give it a try, that's your G minor. You have a root, a minor third, and a fifth, the 3 notes that you need. And likewise over here, you have a root, a fifth, and a minor third. There's a G minor chord. So take your time. Rewatch the video if you need to. Pause it where you need to. Spend some time in the G minor scale. Go on YouTube, find a G minor chord progression backing track, and spend some time just starting from the basics of the box and adding notes as you're going along to kind of just center yourself around these roots. And if you need to, print out a piece of paper with a grid. I'm sure you can do something real quick and do it on paper. See if you can find, if I start from this, if I start from this root note right here, where do I go from there? How do I work my way towards the right here? How do I work my way towards the right and the top of the fretboard in this section here? Starting from that root note there. Those are the exercises that will help you learn about the fretboard, learn about the root notes. And when you're comfortable enough doing it in G minor, I suggest you do it with A minor. There's a lot of these, the patterns are all the same between the notes, but visually on the fretboard, you're going to line up with the odd numbered markers that you have on your fretboard, so that'll be fairly easy. Going from G minor to A minor will be fairly simple. And then try it with B minor. And with B minor, you have a lot of room starting on the 7th fret to kind of just backtrack your way all the way down to the nut. Give that a try. I'm pretty sure this is what Doug was trying to explain in his video, and I probably didn't do a better job than he did at explaining it. But I think this will resonate. This resonates with me. Take care.